Today we have with us Jeff Malcomson, who has been at the Historical Society since 2005. He is our photograph archives manager, and he's been a public historian for 26 years in Colorado, Arizona, and Montana, and he works as an archivist specializing in government records and photographs. So Jeff was born and raised in Orange County, California, where he earned his master's degree in history from Colorado State University, studying public history and the history of the American West. So we're lucky to have Jeff here today to talk about one of the collections from the Montana Historical Society, the Haynes Foundation collection. So he'll be sharing images with us from photographer F.J. Haynes's travels throughout Montana, working for the Transcontinental Railroad. So with that, I will let Jeff take over.
All right. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. First of all, it's great to have a full audience on a night like this. I was a little worried, so thank you for making the effort and putting your jackets on. So, I hope it'll be worth it. I've got a lot of. I titled this. Thanks to a friend of mine who volunteers at the Historical Society, gave me this title. We were just talking about it, and she found something in the newspaper that referred to Haynes, and it talked about he has many fine views, or he's doing many fine views in his trip to Montana. So I just thought, that's a great one. And then you put the presentation together, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of many fine views. So I have a lot of photographs to share with you. So buckle in. I hope you're fascinated by them. There's some variety, but this really focuses on a sort of an earlier period, the early 1880s in Montana. Thus the title. What is my title? Let me get a first screen subtitle: Photographing the Montana Frontier with Haynes. There's over 6,000 photographs taken by F.J. Haynes in the collection, which actually the total collection has also photographs by Jack Ellis Haynes, who was F.J.'s son. So all of their photographs together amount to something like over 40,000 photographs. It's a huge collection. So his F.J. Haynes photographs are from primarily mid 1870s up until the early 20th century. And they amount to something like 6,400, I'm not sure the exact number right now, over 6,000 glass plate negatives. And a lot of them are just really good quality photographs. So, and they've survived, 130, 150 plus years, some of them. The oldest, and are still in pretty good shape. As you'll see in the photographs that I selected and put up, I made sure he took a lot of these early 1880s photos with his stereograph camera. So they're stereographs. They have two images side by side, which we'll see in just a moment. So a lot of them, I just start out with the full image, so you see they're actually from the glass plate negatives, which sometimes they will look a little bit different than if you had a stereograph print or stereograph card with prints on it. Because this is directly from the negative, it's just a little bit higher quality. It's more of a larger field of view usually. So I hope that is interesting to you. And I guess without further ado, we'll dive in. And since it is a lot of photographs, I'll probably move somewhat fast and maybe try to slow down if I'm going too fast, or speed up if I'm going too slow. So we'll see how it goes. I haven't done this full presentation with this many images, but I think we have enough time, so we should be able to get through it and save your questions for the end. We should have a good 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So let's get started. So just wanted to introduce you to Haynes's biography a little bit. He was born in Michigan and grew up with his father ran a store, and he was kind of trained to take his father's place. Unfortunately, economic events in the country in the 1870s, there was the Panic of 1873, I think it is, and led to the demise of his father's business, right as he was coming of age and was going to take over the work. And so he had to go scramble and find work. He ended up from Michigan going to Wisconsin, and found a couple odd jobs, and really actually ended up being destitute for several months, wandering around Wisconsin, trying to survive. He was selling his Haynes Japanese, Japanese polish that he had like a suitcase full of. And he was just surviving off of the proceeds from selling that town to town. So he's really destitute, and it was an event in his life that kind of set him up for just to never end up in that position ever again. And I think in a lot of ways that sort of set his life for his trajectory of just being bent on success at whatever he was doing. Very soon, though, he did get a job and ended up working for a photographer who did photography in a local area and also sold illustrations and stuff, so he could use his sales abilities. He got into another position eventually with a photographer in Wisconsin, William Lockwood, and that was at the Temple of Photography in a small town called Ripon, Wisconsin. And he worked there for a little over a year and really got polished and his skills and got up to the full spectrum of the photography business, and learned everything that he would need to know to run his own studio, and even having a touring wagon that went around to different tourist spots. So he really kind of set him up. When you look back at the rest of his success in his life and in the photo business, he kind of got it all right there in Wisconsin. So that brings us to, he makes a big move in 1876. And his sister and her husband had relocated to Moorhead, Minnesota, which is just on the Red River, the western edge of Minnesota, which is on the edge of the Dakota Territory. So he went out. They kept trying to get him to come out and join them. Said it's, the Northern Pacific Railroad was coming through, and it was going to be just gangbusters to work there. So they needed photographers to help the growing town. So he does that. He moves out and strikes out on his own with his own studio in Moorhead. Very, very soon after, he starts getting Northern Pacific Railroad contracts to photograph the area, in particular Bonanza farms that were starting up around the eastern edge of the Dakota Territory, around Fargo. So he does that work, and as the Northern Pacific builds west, they have more jobs for him. So he's getting more and more work, and he's becoming pretty successful. Enough so that he decides to go ahead and marry his sweetheart, which is a lady named Lily Snyder, who he had met back in Wisconsin. And he marries her in 1878 in January, kind of the off season for photography, and brings her out to Moorhead. And she really becomes a partner in the business in many ways. She runs the studio often, and she was working in the same studio that he worked in Wisconsin, so she knew how to do colorizing and touch-up work on photographs, and knew about a photo studio. So the two of them are really in business together. When he goes out on his many trips, she's the one holding down the studio and keeping the business going, and they write back and forth often. And if you're ever interested and you're hanging out at Montana State University, their letters are in the archives at Montana State University, and during this 1870s period, their letters back and forth are really interesting to take a look at. So if you're ever just curious, you could stop in at the archives at MSU. So they get married. Within the next year, they move the studio across the river over to Fargo, and they stay there for about a decade or so. And that's really where most of this work in the 1880s happens, based out of that Fargo studio, the Haynes studio. So he starts taking trips. I think I forgot to mention that he did, I think in 1878, he takes a trip before he's married, takes a trip out to Deadwood, the Black Hills. My mind went blank there for a second. So that's kind of his first big trip, where he's going out on stage for over miles and miles, and going around gathering stereographic photographs so he can sell them. And he's doing this in league with the Northern Pacific. They wanted him to sort of to be able to sell these photographs, these stereographic sets, to interest people in what was happening in Deadwood and in the Black Hills. They were going through their first big rush, mining rush, of course, at the time. And so he loves that trip. He has a great time, meets these fascinating people that he thinks these Western characters that he writes back to his wife, just saying, you probably wouldn't like them, but they're just amazing people to meet and get to know. So he obviously loves this kind of thing. It's an arduous trip, but he still has a great time. So he wants to do more of that, of course. And he's trying to build up, a large amount of stereographic photographs so he can sell these as sets to people back east who are interested in the West and how it's developing. So he takes a trip, getting into the 1880s here. In the spring of 1880, he takes a trip through the western edge of the Dakota Territory in the Badlands area for the first time. And this is the railroad is just coming into the area. They're massively constructing the Northern Pacific through the Badlands area, especially around the Little Missouri River. And he goes through and takes photographs of the construction camps and some of the construction work, and in particular the Badlands landscape and scenery. And he does make a little foray over into Montana Territory. This is the first time he's entered the Montana Territory. It's kind of, I don't know the exact place that they came to. It seems to be probably most likely around Glendive, and they just come over from the Dakota Territory probably for just a few days. Try to get to the Yellowstone River, and that's what we have. A few photographs from that trip, and this is them in their camp. They're camped out on the Yellowstone River, and Haynes is actually he's the second on the right here. And let me go to the next. This enlarges it. Haynes is the second on the right, and I really don't know who the rest of the crew is. And unfortunately, this is a theme that we're going to keep running into. Haynes did not detail a lot of his photographs. He's good about dating, and most of the time he's correct. There are some inaccuracies, but we don't know a lot about who was who and exactly what they were doing, exactly where they were going. So Haynes is not particularly good at documenting his work in the sense of writing about it. He's a fantastic photographer, very skilled, and he loves the adventure on the trips, and he's a good hunter, he's a good fisherman apparently, all these things. He likes to camp out, he likes this travel, but he's not like a journal writer. And I wish he was. I mean, me and about 100 other historians throughout the last 100 years wish that he had written something or left some other kind of record. It's really just his letters that he wrote that we can get some information from. So he took this other photo, that was just that one. There's another one of their camp that I didn't include. And then this photo of the Yellowstone River, which, they must have been like, well, yeah, it's a big flat area with big flat water. Okay. It doesn't have a lot of appeal necessarily for a photographer. And so that's all we have from this little foray in the spring of 1880. But he has bigger plans very soon on the horizon that we're going to spend quite a bit of time tonight looking at his trip up the Missouri River. This is all before he's never been to Yellowstone at this point. He wanted to make a trip to Yellowstone, and he probably would have done it if he had the right support at the right time a couple of years earlier. But he wasn't able to. Other events got in the way. So he gets to do this trip that I think, though we don't have an account from him, but it seems that he must have really wanted to take this trip. That he probably fantasized about it, that romanticized the upper Missouri and the sort of the fur trade that had been established on the upper Missouri, a good 40, 50 plus years earlier, if not more, that had been developing over the many decades of the 1800s. So really by 1880, the upper Missouri, kind of the fur trade, the society that was created around it is really at its end. I mean, it's coming to an end. And he, more than anybody, should know that, should have seen that, and probably did, because he knows the Northern Pacific Railroad is is building, and surely, but slowly, but steadily westward. And once the railroad reaches, major settlements in Montana, the steamboat trade on the Missouri River is going to be seriously diminished, or if not wiped out, by the railroads, because they can haul the freight and everything else so much cheaper and so much more easily once they establish the railroad. So he's going to go on this trip, and there hadn't been a photographer who had gone up the river this way and documented what he saw in the same way that Haynes did here in 1880. So it's kind of a really interesting point, just before massive change is coming to the area. So this whole set of photos, I think it's about 40 or so. I just tried to select photos the best I could, leaving some out so we didn't get too many. And really, since we don't know the sequence that these were taken in, we don't have any sources from Haynes that really describe background to different photos very much. There's a little bit about maybe the trip to the Great Falls that we see the photo of here, but there's just so much more that could have really illuminated these photos for us now, but we don't have. So I just some of them, as you look at them, you might go, well, maybe that was taken when he was coming down the river. Maybe it was taken when he was going up the river. We don't know. I tried to put them in order, at least for us to browse through, kind of going from from east to west at the different landings that they made. So he got on the steamer, the Far West, the steamboat in Bismarck, Dakota Territory. So after his spring trip, probably went back to civilization over on the eastern side of Dakota Territory, resupplied, came to Bismarck in the summer and boarded the Far West. So they're going to ride the steamboat up the Missouri. They've been taking steamboats up to Fort Benton for about 20 years at this point. So it's not been a long time since they've been able to make it all the way up the river to Fort Benton, but certainly been working their way up for many decades. And so all these different landings that they stop at, they're different points where they've been able to reach the river at some point. And there's a mixture of settlers, of miners trying to come up into Montana's mining areas, trying to come up to different settlements like Fort Benton, or maybe to farms that are being started in the area. Great Falls doesn't exist yet as a town, of course, but certainly a lot of people coming up when the steamboats are able to come up just in the summer months after the spring floods. There's a lot of Native Americans, Native Americans all the way across the Montana Territory along the Missouri River, and there's several agencies that he came in contact with, at least, and stopped at. So we'll see some of these photos. I'm going to probably just go through fairly quickly. It's kind of like a triptych almost, just sharing them with you. I don't have a lot to say about too many of them, but I'll try to just add in some things every once in a while. So first, here's his the steamer Far West that he is riding up the river on. They seem to, as a lot of steamboats were coming up the river at this time, they're sort of in line one after another, and they might have to wait for. It seems that the steamer Helena was just ahead of the Far West, because a lot of his photos are of the Helena. So they might be waiting for the Helena to take on wood or whatever, and so he'd get off and go and take some photos while the Helena is loading up with wood or offloading people or supplies or something, and waiting for his ship to come up. And so you kind of think of how we got some of these photos. That's probably what's going on here. Here's two steamboats side by side, and this may be on the return journey. I'm guessing because the way they're on the north side of the river, it appears most of the time, although not all the time, they're on the north side of the river. And this is you can see that. I think this is the Helena and Can you guys see it? The Benton, thank you. The Benton on the left, probably, and the Helen on the right. One is very loaded with people. So this is just another stop along the way. Poplar Creek, one of the first stops they would make. And see, there's Native Americans sort of gathered just on there's often a little embankment that you see in the photographs, and he's probably photographing a lot of these from the deck of the ship. And so, Poplar is nowadays just east of Glasgow, and the next stop is Wolf Point Agency, and this is one of my favorite photos where he just has an Indian sitting in the grass and the steamship behind him. And it's just like, how did I really want to know the story behind this, and who is this, and he probably talked to him, and what happened. I'd love to know. But here's a little close up of what's going on in the ship as they're docked right there. So another view at Wolf Point. You can see the teepees set up in the back, and there's quite a mix of people when you get into some detail into the crowd. See a lot of variety of people standing around. You just wonder what's going on. Are they're waiting to get back on the boat? Are they just spending a little bit of time waiting for some supplies to offload, or what's going on? We don't know, but this gives you a sense of life when a steamboat arrives at a landing like this on the Missouri River. Another view. This is. I didn't put this in my notes. I'm sorry. You guys can see it better. Fort Peck. So a little bit further west as you get close to Fort Peck. Of course, this is the old Fort Peck site, landing near there. Not Fort Peck as we know it today, but there's actually a few Native Americans on horses in that crowd. You can see some of them. They're moving. They're actually moving. They're sort of blurred in the photograph. But you wonder how just about everybody's looking at the camera. So he's probably set up his camera, and he's okay. I'm gonna go like 3, 2, 1 or whatever you do to try to get their attention and get everybody hold still. But you can't always get a horse to stay still. Okay, this is the Helena again. And again, if they're on the north side of the river, this is pointing downriver. So this could be the return trip. Which on the return back, he bought a Mackinac boat and floated down with himself and several of the people that were with him, crew or helpers. So he was kind of on his own on the way back. I mean, he could stop wherever he wanted, really. And so he may have been low on supplies, low on photographic supplies as well. So he chose to get another good view of the Helena, loaded with, as it was, probably going downriver. And he was able to get on board and took this view of the cabin ready for a meal. Pretty neat to see that. So as you get past, get into what we think of now as sort of the wild and scenic Missouri River, or the Missouri River Breaks area. So this is going to be one of the first stops, is Cow Island, the Cow Island landing. And this was often, for a while, this was as far up the river as steamboats could reach. So they would offload a lot of materials here and then try to transport them from Cow Island to Fort Benton by wagon or oxen and carts, whatever they would do, which would have been very difficult. But for a while, this is as far as they could go. So there's actually, you see the camp set up, the tents there where the steamship, near the steamship. That's just a military camp with soldiers. And Haynes, walks out way up off to the west here and takes this view back of the river, and must have had a good amount of time and spent some time at the military camp, the soldiers. Gets a couple views of that. And this I'm not sure, I'm very uncertain as to when this was taken or where it was taken even, but it is identified as Cinnabon Indians. So it could have been anywhere in that area, perhaps just a camp of Native Americans. It gives you, it's an interesting look at an Assiniboine camp at that time. And this is really, it's a large crowd again. This is further west, near Judith Landing, and you can see he's taking it from the ship, as there's still, part of the cable there from aboard the ship in the view. So I don't know if these people are they waiting for a ship? They're from the far west, or are they from waiting for another one to load up? I don't know. You can see the crowd just hanging out on the beach, enjoying the river while they wait. It's a little bit further west on the river. There's a place called Fort Claggett, named after our early representative to Congress, Montana Territory. This was, an area that was essentially like a trading post. Eventually, it was part of a very large ranch, the Power Norris Ranch, which is now, I guess, the property is now owned by the American Prairie Reserve, and I think there's a stone storehouse that's still in existence from this spot. I don't know if it's in. I don't think it's in this photo, but certainly was a well-known trading post at the time, and close to Judith Landing. So I wanted to give you a little bit at this point, as we're getting into the Missouri River breaks. You see Cow Island on the far right, that area, and just for bearings, down south would be Lewistown. There's Winifred down here. On the north of the river, going up, 191 continues and goes over to Malta, Zortman, Malta, Hayes, and that goes north up toward, points between Havre and Malta, I guess. So, Cow Island, Judith Landing here in the middle, Judith Landing area. Let's see, you're getting into some of the white cliffs that we'll see some photos of. And then Coal Banks Landing is here on the kind of the far western edge of those, the wild and scenic river section as we know today. And of course, Fort Benton is the destination he's trying to reach. It's the head of navigation on the Missouri.
Fort Claggett?
Fort Claggett would be right near Judith Landing, I believe. Yeah, so that's just north of today's Winifred, if you've been up in that area. It's a little bit maybe simpler map, maybe a little easier to see. Also, Hole in the Wall, which is a scene Haynes took a photo of. We'll see in a few minutes. But again, a lot of these photographs are really taken during this stretch. And check my watch, okay. Fort Carroll was another interesting stop. At Fort Carroll, the folks who settled it or created Fort Carroll were trying to kind of rival Fort Benton, or take on Fort Benton for control of. They thought I think Fort Carroll, I believe Fort Carroll's on the south side of the river. Again, like Judith Landing is as well. And so they argued that they could more easily support supplying the mining areas in Montana that were to the south and to the southwest of there better than Fort Benton, perhaps. And, of course, it never really worked out. Fort Carroll was really very close to the end of its time. It was abandoned, and just 2 years later, when business really diminished after this, really the railroad was coming into southern Montana and was putting them out of business. So, kind of survived as a trading post for many years. It started out as a garrison for infantry, really, as a military fort. But I guess that was some of my notes here. In the mid 1870s, the military established it, but it went on for about another 5 or 7 years. So yeah, this is a really great photo. You might have seen it before of, again, the steamer Helena. He's aboard. They're actually stopped and they're wooding up. It's called wooding up in the mountains, and you can see in the close up here of the wood piles, the cords of wood, ready for them to load on, and for boat after boat coming up the river at this point, and they're bringing all this wood down to these locations to service the steamboats from points up where there still are trees close by, but still bringing them from quite a distance, I'm sure. You don't know exactly where that location is, but here's a couple characters. He just titled it Mulligan the Scout, and apparently, according to Freeman Tilden, this is the Following the Frontier, which is kind of a biographic look at Haynes and his work. This came out in the 1960s. So it's probably the only kind of work like that. But it does mention Mulligan as a somewhat well-known Northwestern scout, and he was notorious for just abandoning shoes and not dealing with shoes at all. So he scouted around territory with no shoes on. I guess he's kind of like a hobbit or something, but he needs a pipe. Probably has one. We don't know who his buddy next to him is, though. But yeah, interesting. People like this, Haynes would have just loved these guys, and I'm certain that's why he took their photograph. And it was on board one of the boats. This is a really unique photo. It's the only one like this where he's taking a shot of the clouds. Obviously, a summer storm. They would have run into many of these summer storms that we know all about, thunderstorms. And he just was able to get a fascinating photograph of him. Has a little emulsion damage, unfortunately, on the side, but it's 140 years old, so it's going to have some deterioration. But it's really neat to see a photo like this, and it does say something about Haynes. And he isn't all just a businessman. He is something of an artist in what he's trying to do with photography. And when he sees something like this, he must have seen a lot of cloud masses, and it's like, oh, I should take that. And it was very difficult to get a good photograph of different kinds of natural things like this, where the light was very different and hard to work with. You don't know exactly what you're getting, when you take the photograph. So this is quite amazing. I wonder if he took a lot more and ended up throwing them out, but who knows? This is the only one we have. And then more curiosities along the river, of course, are the fascinating natural features that we know a lot about today that draw a lot of people to the Missouri River. Another scene here this is Citadel Rock, which you still go right on by the river, of course. It's still there. They're called this one Trout Pool, Citadel Rock. I guess he's got a fish there. And then his buddies, watching closely with his rifle. Are they afraid of bears? I don't know. Are there going to be too many grizzly bears in 1880? Maybe not, but not sure why he's fully armed right there, ready to act. But it's a really neat, this would have been great for the stereograph set, to go through and have it'd be always good to have people in the photos for scale and to add interest, of course, for Haynes. I'll go through these quickly. This is Dome of the Citadel, and you do see a man perched on the edge of the rock for scale. They often tried to do that. Teepee Tower. Teepee Tower, and he almost always has the river in the background to help situate this as along the river. Here's Hole in the Wall, and some of the white cliffs, white stone, this wall of white stone. And this one's called Palisades of the Upper Missouri. And this is called Turk's Head. And if you see the man with a turban, I guess. They would have thought was a Turk, I guess, on the left. And again, really, this would have been fabulous with the stereographic viewer to see the depth and the dimension to it, and the river off in the distance. This is a great view of this, one of the last landings that they'd come to, coming through all those natural features, and you come to the, more of the plains open up. Coal Banks Landing, which is still kind of there today. We can still visit the area, of course, and it was quite a little stop for the steamboat after so many miles on the river, getting close to Fort Benton, and as you see in the close-up, quite a lot of supplies offloaded here too, and there's a good set of tents back there. There's some buildings. It's a little more developed landing. I don't think there aren't as many Native Americans here, of course. And they have, which I think I had a slide out of order, unfortunately, but this is a view. So in the background here is Square Butte. So I know that Haynes took a side trip down to Highwood Mountains and close to Square Butte, of course, and that's somewhere nearby, or maybe on that little excursion. You take this photograph. This is really fascinating for historians. It's a Métis family in their tent and some other teepees in the background set up, but there's just loads of Red River carts with kind of the Métis carts, just lots of them. Never seen that many set up like that. So it's a fascinating photograph. And he's there, I guess, I don't know if he had a military escort as he went down there or not, but he does have a soldier here in the scene. It's a great photo. This is the one I think I put out of order, unfortunately, but this is from Coal Banks Landing, and they have a little public park along the river with a bench, and so there's a family sitting here, and Haynes took their photograph. They're waiting for the steamboat to get to whistle so they can get called back on board, probably. But kind of neat to see this little, sign of some civilization on the frontier. So of course they make it all the way up the river to Fort Benton, and Haynes gets this wonderful view from the far bank, the south bank of the river, looking back down the river and getting the full sweep of Fort Benton. He just takes a few photos. I think he's running low on his photographic supplies, on his negatives. Of course, this is all wet plate photography at this point, so he's got all his chemicals and wet plate negatives to develop. So very dependent on having all the supplies and not using too much of it and making it last. So it's difficult work, but he takes two photos that we know of here, that we have still, of buildings. I believe he stayed at the Shoto House. It was a boarding house, and probably had food and everything. So good place to stay, though probably a little bit small. But it's Fort Benton. It's the end of the river. It takes another photo of one of the large buildings in Fort Benton at that time. It has a couple banks in it, and so very substantial building. And remember, this is 1880. It's 16 years after Montana Territory is founded. And he takes the penultimate trip. This is the thing that he really wanted to do, was make it all the way to the Great Falls. This is the natural wonder that he was dying to get photographs of. And he knew that these would sell, that if he could get to the Great Falls and then have all these other photographs up the Missouri River, this is a story that he could sell and tell in the stereographic set. So he gets several of the falls, has one of his assistants out there. Of course, he has to pose himself, and this is like his great, he titles this one, Our Artist, for himself. So it's his self-portrait. And it's the best self-portrait of his life, really. I mean, that he's made this adventurous trip all the way, he's trekked all the way up past the head of navigation, many miles more to the Great Falls, and gets this great photo on a great, very nice summer day, of course. There you see he's He's loaded. He's got his revolver and his knife ready. He's got his, in case, you never know. I'm sure they knew Lewis and Clark's stories of being attacked by animals at every point along the river. So he's ready to take on a rattlesnake or something, I guess. And he's got his little box of his negatives right there. Haynes Fargo. This is likely, I've always thought this was the Great Falls, the big falls. But I think it's Rainbow Falls. I figured that out recently. And I'm still going like, is that right? That must be Rainbow Falls. I think it is. It's hard to tell today with the dam there, but and this is called Cascade Falls. Haynes, but I believe that's Rainbow Falls as well, because Lewis and Clark named it Beautiful Cascade Falls was their name that they gave it. And this is not too long at, I think the name was changed. I read somewhere 1872, so it's only been about 8 years since it was changed to Rainbow. And Haynes was probably still calling it both Rainbow and Cascade Falls. But, okay, another side trip they make probably from Coal Banks. They probably went on their way down, maybe stop at Coal Banks and get off and go north, strike north to Fort Assiniboine. Fort Assiniboine was just founded not too long before this. They're still building the fort, some of the fort buildings, and they build so many of the buildings with. There's some that are built with stone, but many of them are built with brick. And so one of the fascinating things we see. This is a stone guardhouse at Fort Assiniboine. Some of the brick officers' quarters here, but we have a set of photos that Haynes took of the construction work going on at Fort Assiniboine, and the soldiers, and they sort of brought all the skill and expertise available among all the soldiers who maybe had done some brickwork before, some masonry with bricks and made bricks. And they're able to make a bunch of bricks with the material they have, some of the resources there. Here's actually a photo of the workers working in the mortar beds. They're preparing mortar for the brickwork. So these are really interesting. Just that he just happened to be there at the right time in the summer of 1880. They're still constructing the fort. There aren't very many Western forts that have these well-established brick buildings like Fort Assiniboine did. So it's really neat to see these photos and have them get some close-up of. He also, you can see almost every person's face. So he had them all stand at a place where they could see him, and he said, "Okay, stop, don't move." So don't move for a few seconds so he could get the photograph and get it clear and high quality. Just why we're able to zoom in and still see so many of the people and see what they're doing. So this is actually laying the foundation of one of the officers' quarters buildings going up. And this is another view of, go back, of a barracks building being built as well at the same time. So, all right, so that wraps up the Missouri River trip. We got about 10 minutes. We can run through this, the remainder. That's a really, there's a lot of photos there of just that period of time, and I really want to kind of conclude that by reflecting on Haynes making that trip. That really nobody else had documented the Upper Missouri, especially at that time when it's kind of at its nadir. It's really at a time where it's ending. Its prime. It's certainly not in its prime anymore. And so he's able to photograph all these different aspects of it. Natural landscapes, the people that are gathered along the steamboat landings, and the different forts and trading posts that are still there and still struggling and trying to hang on this frontier outpost, along the Missouri River. He photographs the construction of this new big fort, up on that just has a harbinger of good things for the future of Montana Territory, to have this large fort for the U.S. military to establish a big outpost across the northern part of Montana. So all these things that are pretty substantial things he's able to photograph on this trip, and successfully brings them back down the river, and just all of the things that he would have had to go through to get these photographs and secure them, and then to make the stereographic cards, the prints, and sell them to so many people that really did buy a lot of his stuff, and having the Northern Pacific Railroad promoting it too, to sort of promote this new Montana territory that they're just now building into. So now the rest of these a couple dozen more photos are kind of wanted to have, he took a lot of photos of the early railroad construction through Montana. So from 1881, 82, 83, until they completed the railroad in 1883, the last bike ceremony in September at Garrison. He's really traveling the entire state, but he's really focused on the Northern Pacific construction. So that's what we'll see here. So one of the first sets of photos is, of course, on the very eastern edge of Montana Territory. This is very close to Glendive area. In Glendive, by 1881, I believe Glendive is about the end of the railroad track coming from the east. So it's end of track at that point. There's a lot of activity, a lot of things going on there. They've just constructed this little section through an area called Eagle Butte, and this is the summit of Eagle Butte, photographic, kind of seeing the whole butte and all the area around it. You can actually see the railroad tracks right there. There's like a little bit edge of the railroad tracks, and they actually skirt right along the butte and between the butte and the river, which you see here. So they've finished the construction almost. They're still working on it, but they have the track laid. I think they have a lot of trouble with rockfall and the river wearing away at the kind of the edge of below the tracks. So they're having to shore that up. Haynes is able to take some photos of the activity, some of the construction activity going on with that. He gets a couple of the workers clearing more rock and dumping it off the edge to shore up the tracks. It's kind of a constant battle, I'm sure they have with the river. A little close up. These workers doing some heavy labor for sure. And it's probably hot, if you can imagine, eastern Montana in the summer. So they also have this very substantial cut that they had constructed through there, and you can see there's a man standing on the rock a little ways up in the distance.
That's all by hand.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm sure there's some horse and mule labor as well. But so then heading west across the territory, we're kind of traveling fast here, but this is 1882. So that was the fall of 1881. So Haynes makes his first trip up the Yellowstone in 1881. He makes it up to Yellowstone Park for the first time. And then it's really every year after that, he's coming in the summer up to Yellowstone Park, and he really established himself as a photographer of Yellowstone, thanks to the Northern Pacific Railroad too. But along the way, he takes photographs as he travels to promote the Northern Pacific construction and for contracts with the Northern Pacific Railroad. So he's got photographs of some of these large infrastructure sections. They're the most difficult construction projects, the tunnels and bridges as they go across. This is Yellowstone County. It's near the Bighorn River. They had to cut through some rock, through a rocky area. This is the Bighorn River Bridge. There's still a couple bridges. I think there's an interstate bridge and a train bridge still right here in the same area. I'm sure that bridge is not the one standing today, but it was. So a lot of these first bridges, they're wooden, and they didn't last too long before they replaced them, upgraded them with steel and so on. So these are very early, quick bridges. They're trying to build this railroad and get it done so they can make it a success, because the Northern Pacific failed earlier, and so it was very important that they get this whole project done and build these bridges. This is the bridge crossing the Yellowstone at Billings. So most of the crossings were the smaller tributaries of the Yellowstone, and then finally here, this bridge is a little bit more substantial, crossing the Yellowstone right at Billings. And so Billings is very, very new town, of course, at this point. This is 1882. So another point along the way, they spent a lot of time construction is the Bozeman Pass tunnel. There's a couple scenes from the Bozeman Pass operation. You know, they would build the track on both sides, and they just have to bypass the tunnel, and they might have some kind of bypass that would come up and around, or some way to get engines up while they're constructing and taking all the time to build these tunnels, things that would take much longer. So there's another side. I think this is the west portal, the west approach, the Bozeman Pass area, 1882. And then there's the Mullen Tunnel, close to home here. This tunnel was a major problem and ended up, I don't believe they actually finished it before they had the last spike celebration, but they were still working on it. This is 1883. It's probably just before the last spike ceremony. So they did finish it eventually, of course, but they spent a lot of time. So he has several photos of it. There's the portal going in, the east entrance of the tunnel. This is one of the grand structures of the Western Montana Railroad, Northern Pacific, the Merritt Gulch Trestle. This is all built with wood, of course, 1883, and I believe at the time it was the largest wooden railroad structure in the world. I don't know how long it held that title, but probably not too long. But
Where is that?
so this is just basically going up Evero Hill, or starting to go up Evero Hill, just north of I-90. Now Merritt Gulch is off to the east as you're heading up toward Evero Hill. So just a little bit west of Missoula area, in Missoula County. And you see the car up there. Well, I don't think this is the time but shortly thereafter, Haynes, well, maybe it actually is, I think, yeah. So the caboose, it's just the caboose and the engine, but this is supposed to be the payroll coach that he mentions in the title. And so maybe that's why all the guys are hanging around it, but very, very precarious place to be sitting up on top of. But, you know, you look at this, a photo like this just helps you see how proud everybody was. Look at this accomplishment of building this amazing thing. Of course, you know, the wooden structure didn't last too long. They replaced it within 20 years. This is 1894, the steel trestle that took the place of that wooden trestle that Haynes also took a photo of in 1894. So. Some more scenes of railroad construction near Missoula County area, 1883. Big teams working hard to try to finish. So this is the last spike ceremony, the last spike pavilion in Garrison. They had a big extravaganza, you know, all the dignitaries, Ulysses Grant and everybody, you know. So Haynes was there. It took about, I don't know, maybe 10 to 12 photos of the area, things going on. This is during one of the speakers speaking. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the best, of course. But it's probably the train that coming from Portland that was heading all the way across from Portland to I guess, St. Paul or end of the line.
Garrison?
Garrison, yeah. Yep. So it's
There was that many people around.
September 1883. They came on trains from many places, and there was quite an excursion that went along with Villard, who was the president of the Northern Pacific at the time. So, and this is a bonus photo thrown in from 1890. It's one of my favorites, just along the Clark's Fork, and there's 5 or so Chinese men on this handcar. Probably a maintenance crew doing some work out for the day, and Haynes got a photo of it, August 1890. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's probably, you know, out there on far west, Clark's Fork. Anyway, if somebody can find where that one was, I'll be very happy to know. I just want to run through this is my conclusion here of some town views that Haynes took. Of course, he was in the towns that became substantial places, thanks to the railroad in many ways. But this is Glendive, and in 1881, again, so right at his first trip up the Yellowstone River. And Glendive is probably the end of the line at this point. It's just a boom town, and you can see the folks gathered. Some men and a few women, a few ladies are out there. But lots of construction, I guess, probably, and some mess and work going on. Very new buildings. Miles City, of course, next town to come across. Very much a cow town, of course, at this point, as the railroad is coming near. And it's going to change a good bit when the railroad arrives, too. So, this is just another selection, one of my favorites, the Pioneer City, which is near Gold Creek area, around, just west of Deer Lodge. Pioneer City, it's kind of a dying concern at this point in 1883 when Haynes takes a photo. There are some, you see there's a Chinese grocer still over on the right. You can see a sign for that. There's some children in the streets, but it's probably, on its downward slope as far as a little mining camp, and certainly doesn't exist today. It's gone. The far western part of the state, Thompson Falls, and Haynes has several good views of Thompson Falls. Actually, the falls are there. They're not part of the dam structure that's there today, but really neat view of his first trip there in 1884. And of course, Helena. I had to put in a Helena view. Takes this in 1883, and this is the west side of a west and east side overview that he took from the hill right up there. A little closer, you can pick out your favorite building and see if it's there in 1880. But quite a bit going on over the mansion district. There's one good mansion. Somebody can name that mansion in 3 seconds? No.
One house on the far left is the May Butler house.
Yeah. Yeah, there's probably several that are still there up in that area. So just love these overviews are fantastic. Yeah. And quite a main street is well developed, but anyway, we could spend too much time on that. This is a very well-known view you've probably seen before of the depot. It's the Northern Pacific Depot, and which is very far from town at this point. 1883, or actually this is 1885. This is December 1885. Mount Helena in the distance. So where our depot is out there today still. It's a different.
And that last, or
Telegraph.
Telegraph.
Yeah, telegraph. Definitely. Heading into town. So there's this is my grand finale. He took a trip right after taking that photo of the depot in Helena. He takes a trip with his Palace Studio car, attached onto the end of a Northern Pacific branch line railroad engine. He takes it up to Wicks, so south of here in Jefferson County, just kind of southwest out of Jefferson City. And this is 1885 in December. He takes goes out there, takes one view with snow on the ground of Wicks, a little mining town with a smelter. You can see enveloped in the smoke from that. Just a great classic shot of a mid 1880s Montana, kind of at its peak as far as the mining, so the beginning of industrial mining in the state or in the territory still. With just great little Main Street view and some small residences for workers in the background, and some boarding houses, I'm sure, and some other related buildings related to the smelter and what's going on there. So it's a great shot. And he comes back a year later and takes a few more photos. There's no snow on the ground here, but again, it's a very similar view. Not too much has changed. 1886, December. Gets a different other side of town. You can see the substantial smelting works. And this is his Haynes Palace Studio car. They're right parked on the tracks, as he would do often when he arrived in a place. Offload the Palace car and go and take some photographs. And he got a shot of the charcoal kilns. They're just outside of, just kind of northeast of, outside of Wicks. And a nice street scene with some folks gathered around to get in the photograph. Always a haze and smoke lingering among the buildings. Don't know if that's because it's December, if it's just the way it is. But here's another shot of he was hired by the Bach Quarry and Company dry goods store to take this photo of their store. He went nearby to Gregory, which is just not too far from Wicks, and got an interior view of the Bach Quarry store in Gregory, which was really interesting to see. And nearby, this is another bonus shot. This is the concentrator just nearby Wicks and Corbin, and just again shows you another scene, some large structures having to do with industrial mining that he was able to get at this time in the mid 1880s. And so this is just kind of an idea to give. He's taking these kind of photographs wherever he is in the state when he's able to, and is there, in a time where it's at the peak of its economic activity. So it's pretty neat to have these photos. Of course, this is not the end. You can go onto the Montana History Portal, and we have over 3,000 photos from F.J. Haynes available to browse, search, find. So if there's any topic or place in Montana that you'd like to see some Haynes photos, just go onto the main search function, put in Haynes, Haynes, and then put the town like Corbin or Wicks. Just add a town named Bozeman, and you'll get 20 or so photos of Bozeman area or something to do with Bozeman or Bozeman Pass. So just play around and explore. I hope you have a good time with that. There's certainly another 3,000 plus photos of Haynes, F.J. Haynes, that we would love to get digitized, and we'll be working on in the future to get more of them available online. But we do have them.
Did he have film at that time, or how was he taking pictures?
Yeah, glass plate negatives.
Sorry, can I pause you really quick? So
yeah.
if we have questions like this, can you please speak them into their microphone so the recording will catch your question, and then we can get Jeff's answer.
What type of film? Did he actually film, or was it on a glass?
Yeah, so it's going to be glass negatives. He used glass negatives well into the 1900s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he could have switched over to film probably, in the 1890s. They were certainly making some film negatives by that point, but a lot, he's well set on using glass and familiar with it, and so he continues to use that. And he did switch to nitrate film, probably. It was probably his son mostly that switched to it, but there is, I believe there's some nitrate film. So we have probably 25,000 or more nitrate film negatives, and a lot of that is Yellowstone photography, photos from Yellowstone. So there's quite a bit of Jack Haynes material that's on film. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're a little over time, but we can take a few more quick questions if nobody minds, I think. So yeah, thank you guys for sticking around.
About 9 years ago, we did a coal bank landing to Judith Landing. It was pretty incredible to see the animals along the river and
It's in the scenery.
we were going downriver, which was great.
Yeah, a lot easier. That's good.
Thank you.
You kind of touched on this, and even the first question was a little bit about this, but I'm really curious if it was of huge pain to travel with the equipment that he needed to use back in the day. And then also if you can remind me about the size of the collection and how many are what types of negatives. Anything about that that's interesting to you to talk about, please do.
Sure. Yeah, it's very difficult to successfully obtain photographs at this point. I mean, it's still wet plate negative, so once you pour chemicals onto your glass plate negative, you need to put that in the camera and execute the photograph, and then treat that negative with more chemicals to develop it very soon after. So you have to have, kind of your equipment, a place to do that work. You have to have your chemicals in good condition and not lose them, especially when you're way out, on a trip like this. There's no place you're going to be able to get extra chemicals or extra glass plates. So if you break a bunch of glass plates, it's like that's it. Whether you had to use them, had shot photographs on them or not, you've lost that. So it's very hazardous, difficult, the most difficult photography to do. And so the fact that he's able to do this on this long trip is pretty amazing. Yeah.
And then do that in the dark too, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, you'd have to be in the dark for part of it, and so you'd have a setup, probably set up to a wagon or something, if you, I assume, or maybe with mules. I don't know. I'd love to see. It's too bad we don't have a better account of how he worked, but other photographers have left pretty good accounts. William Henry Jackson is a good one to look into to understand kind of how they would do wet plate photography out in the far reaches of the western United States. But it is very difficult. And he's shooting 5x8 stereographic, 5x8 glass plates loaded into his stereograph camera, so stereo camera.
I have a quick question, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
The images, they are remarkably sharp.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about his equipment, where he got the lenses, or?
We do. I'd have to look it up in this book, because there's an appendix in this, which is one of the best features of it, that talks in a little bit more detail about his equipment. And that equipment was donated along with the Haynes Foundation collection. So we have his cameras that survived. We have those in the Montana Historical Society collections as well. So.
How would they set their exposure? I mean, maybe getting a little into the weeds, but these days you've got light meters. There's pretty easy ways to do that, but of course they didn't have any of that stuff. And as you said, the negatives, those pictures are super duper sharp, and it looks like there's great exposures.
Yeah.
How'd they do that?
It's a very good question. I wish I had a good answer. Experience that he knew what he was doing. And that's the thing, we can look at these photos and we're just like, oh, no, those are great photos. We can produce that kind of photo in an instant without knowing anything. I mean, we have the technology to do that. He had to have experience, ability. I mean, I think Haynes, there's other photographers that are as good as he was, certainly, but it's a very limited amount of people that can execute these kind of photographs. And all the photographs that he took all around Yellowstone National Park, it's amazing. We really have to, I wish, it's a hard thing for modern folks like us to understand how difficult this is, but, and maybe I'm not the best at explaining it, but it is hard, yeah.
Great. So I think that's probably a good stopping point. So thank you, Jeff, for your great presentation and all the wonderful photos.